on things.
All right.
But
So we'll call this meeting to order, and it looks like we're about half and half here. We're still missing some of the budget committee, but I think we have a good core from council and budget. So I think we can proceed, as we're not voting on anything tonight. I don't know that we need an agenda. I'm hoping that the PowerPoint went out to everyone, so even those who couldn't make it will have a chance to look at it before the September 15th meeting. So if you bring the PowerPoint up, I think it has the agenda on it, and we can, thank God that Sue has tamed her computer.
well, Sue, I don't know if you want me to do roll call. I can be self-sufficient and do that.
Yes.
Okay, yes, okay. Let's do that before we dive in too far.
Okay.
So I've got the roll call sheet, so I'll be full service tonight. Solomon.
Thank you. I don't have the roll sheet. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Solomon Allen. Don't see anybody on the attendee side either. So Greg Meanahan.
I think he's here looking for you.
Yeah.
Got it. I heard yeah. Timothy Carpenter.
Here.
Thank you. Beth Kochman. Nope. Lizelle Mathai. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped Molly. So our esteemed Sofa, our chair, sorry.
Yes.
Lizelle Mathai. Brad Sitton.
No, that's what I meant by we're missing a chunk of the folks from the citizen side, but
Levi Stroop, who's our student rep. No. Okay, on the council side, Mayor Rogers.
Present.
Councillor Bacon.
Here.
Councillor Cofield.
What up?
Councillor Findlay.
Here.
Councillor Martinez Plancarte.
Here.
Councillor Yarnell Holloman. And Councillor McBride.
Here.
Great. Okay. And there was on the agenda, there was approval of the minutes from the series of meetings we had in April and May, and those minutes were distributed as well. So I'm not sure if you may want to vote on those or not. But.
okay. Can we get a motion to approve or a
I move to approve.
second?
Second.
So Bryce is second, Rick as with the motion. All those in favor say aye. It's
Aye.
easy if you raise a hand as well, because it's not easy to see. Any opposed? Raise the other hand. Okay, looks unanimous. Actually, for Denise and Rick, unless you scream no, we're going to assume you've raised your hand since your video isn't working. Let us know. Don't be shy.
I raised my virtual hand up in the
Awesome.
corner of my
Oh, I
name.
see it.
So did Rick.
Awesome. Nice. Okay.
So did I. There you go.
Well done.
Perfect.
Okay. If we
So-
brought up the PowerPoint, could we see?
Yeah, I think we're ready for the PowerPoint, but one quick thing of housekeeping before we bring that PowerPoint up is I wanted to briefly introduce Katie Strode, who is our finance manager and has been with us for now, I'm told, almost 2 months, and we're super happy to have her. She came to the city from Park Rose School District and is, I believe, a Sherwood resident. But we're trying to pull her into the trajectory of Newberg, and super happy that she's here and she's doing a great job learning and kind of getting her feet under her. So just happy to have her as sort of our sane head as we sort of run through the PowerPoint, how things might work from a finance perspective.
Yes, it's nice to meet everyone. Thank you.
Very glad you're here.
Okay, Sue, sorry.
No, that's okay. So normal procedure might be to have the first slide of the slides be the agenda, and then everyone can have a visual see of what the what the meeting is, and I think it was at the front of your email, actually, so that's fine. I think we're into the meat of it now. So if we go to the second slide,
Yes.
and there it is. Excellent.
So,
Your
so
slide.
that, you know, in essence, wanted to borrow heavily from folks who have this slightly more figured out than I do, which is not to say that I don't have it figured out, but I don't know that anyone really actually has this yet figured out. But borrowing from some slides and conversations with other managers in the region, with the National League of Cities, GFOA, a number of different national level sources, tried to put together kind of a framework of what ARPA is at this moment, at least when it comes to the state and local fiscal recovery funds, which is a wonderful acronym of SLRFR, I guess, but we probably won't go by the acronym. Wanted to talk through kind of what this looks like for Newberg, both funding and then you know, the intent of the American Rescue Plan Act is to really mitigate COVID impacts to our community and other communities across the country. So once we talk about that, I think, you know, the sort of second through fourth major bullets there of consider the COVID impacts, get feedback on principles for evaluating investments, and getting feedback for community engagement, and really kind of looking at a timing roadmap. That's where I would like to spend most of this meeting. And, you know, so I want to give you a little context about what we might have coming or have already received. And then really start a conversation, I hope, a dialogue with all of you about what areas of impact we have and how we might use this money, this kind of once in a lifetime money to address some of those impacts. So next slide, please. Okay, so in a really, you know, just kind of trying to use this graphic to think about orders of magnitude, I guess, you know, just thinking about American Rescue Plan Act, ARPA, as a giant funding thing, you know, essentially a bill or a law now that 1.9 trillion, which is extraordinary, but also just the idea that there are really large buckets within that funding, that large overall funding, that you've got stimulus checks and things that have gone to individuals directly. You've got the state and local recovery funds that are that bottom left blue square rectangle. And then there's also all kinds of other funding streams related to health, related to small business, related to specific types of businesses, related to veteran support, transportation and infrastructure investments, you know, all kinds of quote unquote goodies within ARPA. And so, you know, just as overall background, ARPA was signed into law on March 11th. It set into motion a number of sort of deadlines that we have now received our first tranche of money. I guess that's federal parlance for half of your money. And we expect to receive the second in a year from now. But that really launches us into the next slide, which is, you know, sort of what areas that we have both direct funding. Next slide, please. Sorry. Then where we've got direct funding, and then you know, other opportunities, I guess. You know, again, thinking about this is not just, it shouldn't just be in my mind about our money, if you will, direct funding, but also other programmatic allocations. Are we able to advance the slide? Well, I'm going to keep moving. I've got my slides, so if we can catch up.
Hey, Sue, it may be frozen, Dan.
Yeah, I think it might
Oh,
be
there
frozen.
she is.
There she
Okay,
I think she was
perfect.
away from her desk.
Okay,
Thank
sorry.
you.
So the idea here is thinking about the various pathways. You've got aid to local government on the left and aid to state government on the right, and then sort of this idea of individuals, businesses, organizations. There's all kinds of opportunities within, you know, even K through 12 education capital projects, things that are not in our bailiwick on the right, that are both formula like our money, which is sort of allocated to us based on population, and then money that's come through the state legislature and other avenues. So there's a lot of different things happening out there, and I think it's because, as we all, I think, well know at this point, we're a year and a half into what feels like an unending COVID, somewhat of a nightmare, and we're trying to think about ways to mitigate the impacts and to address those. And so there's the idea, and something we'll talk about later on in terms of impacts to Newberg. I think you've got in there the idea of, local government impacts, our operations and the types of services we provide to the community, as well as the need for services to individuals. Folks have lost jobs, businesses have gone under, the idea that nonprofits and others have been impacted, and then that there are structural things that folks need in terms of both services and just general, ways to continue life, and just dealing with those kinds of impacts as well. So there's funding for all kinds of things. Next slide, please. So the state and local government funding was $350 billion in total. Our slice is in that little orange sliver, which kind of tells you that it's not part of there's a ton of other money out there, I guess, that is a lot of money, 195 billion to states and to the city, to being from Washington, DC, to the city of Washington, DC, not the state. And certainly the counties are getting, between states and counties, the lion's share of the funding. But there's significant and really game-changing funding available to us. So next slide, please. And to all kinds of other entities. It presents us with some opportunity and some challenges. And I think that's what we're hopefully going to talk through is, the idea that we have this sort of need, the polarity, I think, of the need for immediate assistance and relief to our community members who are struggling, into businesses, as well as this idea that the money is meant to be expended over a number of years. And so you kind of want to both be thoughtful, but also address immediate issues. So we've got a number of fiscal years to cycle this through. We've got this balance on the right there, the long-term needs, and we'd like to think about this as game-changing because it is so immense and really just this cash infusion that is unprecedented, but also balancing, and so I think it's something that we're going to need to do as we think about, the impacts is what can be transformative and what are the immediate needs as well, not forgetting the fact that there are people who are struggling for day-to-day subsistence, as well as, we're trying to move our community forward in a way that is more resilient in the future to disruption and all kinds of other potential issues. There's also, what has been discussed, and I think has gone through several iterations at the federal level, is transportation funding in addition to the ARPA funding, which it's exciting to think about, but it's also one of those things where there are somewhat ARPA is somewhat open-ended, but there are some limitations on allowable uses, and we'll talk about those for ARPA. But the idea that it's I think we should very much be looking at supporting and tapping into that infrastructure funding when it comes through. So next slide, please. So what do we get? What does it look like? And this is estimates because based on what we had heard before, our amount went up, the allocation that we received, which is good. Obviously, you want it to go up if you're going to get money from someone. But City of Newberg is set to receive in the next 2 years, $5.3 million. Those funds is the key thing that I tried to put up at the top, that funds need to be obligated by the end of December 2024, but expended, you have until 2026, the end of that calendar year, to expend the funding. And so you've got essentially 5 years to spend this amount of money. So again, it's that polarities of immediate need and immediate issues, and money that is allowed to be expended over an extremely long amount of time. Just looking regionally, McMinnville got 7.7, Yamhill County 20.7, And there is a different funding source within that overall set of boxes that we looked at in the earlier slide. The ESSER, in the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, and the city's school district received 5.3 million in that as well. So next slide, please. One of the themes for me, and hopefully you'll all agree with this, is it's all well and good to receive $5.3 million, but I'd like more. And so we've been lucky so far in the sense that the state legislature, the second set of bullets there, the lower half of the slide, they received an allocation of funding that they could allocate to communities within their jurisdiction. And so Representative Bill Post reached out, offered to work with the city on a project. What are our needs? And one of the projects that was put forward to him was the idea of addressing ADA ramps along critical routes, something that is expensive and really needs to be done correctly. And critical routes increases the ability of all of our residents to get around our community. That this 400,000 that he was able to give us makes a huge stride forward in our ability to fund those critical route ADA ramps. Sidewalks and other things I think will be taken care of elsewhere, but just those ramps are expensive and need to be done correctly. And oftentimes we end up as a city doing them because of all those factors. And so it's super helpful money. So we are expecting to receive that amount from the legislature. I believe if I was told it will come in October. And that again is sort of dedicated to a specific source. We also received from the Department of Transportation a check that we weren't expecting, and from the state, I think it was 360,000, and that was really unexpected. But also because of that, it's not necessarily yet been allocated, and so I think it needs to be part of the discussion as we think about the pot of money that we have, but also this one I think is or should be intended for transportation related projects, and is more dedicated to a specific source or a direction, I guess, when we expend it than our other existing money. So next slide, please. So there are other programs as mentioned, and I think we've identified throughout COVID the impact that COVID has had on restaurants, on hospitality, on entertainment, on all kinds of those types of sectors. There are specific small business assistance programs, grant programs out there. Amounts are listed on the slide, but just something to keep in mind that we, as I mentioned, we don't necessarily want to be satisfied with the formula allocation. I think remaining competitive and seeking additional funds or trying to connect our business community specifically with some of these programs is a goal of mine, and I think will help our community recovery if we're able to be successful there. That I would see as a role that we're in essence trying to serve as a connector and assistance for folks who are applying for potentially for their own grants directly, depending on the rules for all these types of opportunities. But anyhow, just sampling of the kind of grants that are out there already, and I believe there are several others that are being spun up right now, including grants that are focused on hospitality, tourism, and more specific to Newberg kinds of grant opportunities. So next slide, please. Additionally, there's obviously been impacts to families, to individuals, households. So within the ARPA funding, there are specific allocations for expansion and extensions of existing tax credits and programs that should help needy families and folks who've been really impacted by job loss and other things. And so again, I'm not sure that these are specifically things we would sort of reach out and have a grant program about, but I think that puts us in the city, at least in a role of informing folks of these are funding sources available and trying to, again, whether it's through our nonprofit community or, just directly, again, trying to to encourage investment in the community for recovery, specific to the impacts we've had. These are opportunities that are out there. Some of the homeowner assistance funding, again, maybe that one comes through the states. Maybe one of those things that we're able to help connect and again try to provide information to folks. I can pause. Yep.
Quick question, Dan. Some of these things wouldn't necessarily be, as you say, city things that we reach out to people with, but still highly useful if people know they're there.
Right.
Is this something the county is working on, or is this something that gets, I don't know how people find out about child tax credit, for instance, or nutrition assistance? Is that county-based?
I would think the nutrition assistance maybe and maybe school-based, but I'm not sure yet. But I would think that it's part of the opportunity is partnership and again trying to make sure we're aware of what's out there and promoting those things. I'm not sure if there would be in some of these instances. It's not like there's a direct there's a thing I want it and an application. It's more making sure that we get our share. And so there may be a role in the community for support letters or, essentially trying to encourage making sure that we get funding and that the allocations are made in Newberg in an appropriate level and manner. I think just knowing there are, with most of these things, knowing that they exist and knowing that they could have a positive impact on our community means that we raise our voice, and that may often come in the form of letters or outreach through state or federal representatives, that kind of thing.
Okay, I know on the small business ones, the chamber and the downtown coalition can and have get the word out, but I'm not sure who does stuff like this. So thanks.
Yeah. So next slide, I think, more just another slide of the programs that are out there, and just again illustrative of that there is more money out there than just the amount that we got, and there are programs spun up to try to address what are perceived needs and perceived issues related to COVID and how it's impacted our communities. And really some of this is trying to get folks back to work. Some of it is addressing the impacts we've had or that we've seen in specific sectors, or in addressing, some of the things that have spun out of, what has been a pretty awful year and a half. And so, just thinking about mental health services and other things like that. So, areas where like job retraining and those things are within our economic development strategies. And so, just thinking again, this is a huge program, 1.9 trillion, just making sure we're aware of what's out there and looking for avenues to bring more of the funding to our community. Next slide. So what's eligible? Sorry, I needed a little bit of fun in my slides. What's eligible within the program, and the next slide's ineligible funding programs. And so in essence, there are four categories that the National League of Cities at least has sort of boiled this down to. So I borrowed from them. In essence, we're looking to respond to the public health emergency and its negative impacts to the economy. And so you've got the idea of assistance to households, to small businesses, to nonprofits. It's really broad when you think about that, or aid to impacted industries, and tourism, travel, and hospitality is called out very specifically. So I feel like that is a very Newberg sector, and one that we should put together, if not a very specific ask or several. It's an opportunity at a regional level as well. The second area of eligible use is to respond to the workers and folks who've been required to react and respond and have had to have sustained stamina to respond to COVID. And so the idea here would be premium pay for eligible workers who are, I think, directly responding to the health emergency. The third is provision of government services that have been reduced And, essentially, I think addressing some of the revenue loss in responding to the emergency and essentially thinking about, the public health, again, element of that. And then lastly is infrastructure, but very specifically water, sewer, and broadband. Note that roads are not in that category. Yes, ma'am. You're muted.
But I was having a great conversation. I want you all to know that.
Talk. Okay.
The replacement of lost revenue is vital in our community because of the TLT. So really want to, the TLT contribution to the general fund that got reduced during this last year is eligible for being replaced to fund things that we could not fund in the budget. So I wanted to just raise a flag and wave it there, because we cut some things we didn't want to cut, but just, it doesn't mean we have to, but it is an eligible use.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, I appreciate you pointing that out, and I didn't pay her to say that. But yeah, no, the TLT loss, and I was just talking with Katie. The Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, has a calculator for loss and impact, and has the expectation. I think the feds have the expectation that we will calculate essentially what our estimated losses were, and so TLT would be one of those areas. And they have you actually do it as a budget as a whole, not necessarily line items of your budget that were impacted. But I think we would still be eligible to sort of demonstrably say that there was an impact to our operations. Next slide, please. So ineligible uses, contributions to pension funds. So the idea of paying for essentially compliance with labor laws and pension costs, presumably I would think maybe more of a state level question or concern. Contributions to rainy day funds or reserves, legal settlements, outstanding debt payments, offsetting tax cuts, general infrastructure spending outside of broadband, water, and sewer. There you go. That's where we can't necessarily pay for roads. Rules clarify that essentially the lost revenue can be allocated to other infrastructure outlays. So I think we have to do a little bit of gymnastics and some calculations there. And then we're not able to use matching funds, use ARPA for matching funds unless it's allowed in other program. So we'll have to see. The next slide or two, I believe. I think I got a little placeholder in here. You can go ahead to the next one. So COVID impacts, hoping that this is somewhat of more of a discussion. Tried to kind of speed through me talking and maybe get to we talking. But COVID impacts, again, we're going to be required to demonstrably talk about and address impacts. And so I think it's important that we agree on what impacts we've seen as a community. So the idea that who was impacted, and I think I put in here the idea of disparate impact, the idea that there were some things already baked in, that some members of our community were already in a position to be more vulnerable to the disruption, both from a job standpoint and school or all kinds of other means and reasons. And so the impacts aren't necessarily even or uniform across all individuals, sectors, communities, all that stuff. Thinking about sectors that were impacted, we obviously had economic impacts, both our operations, but across the board, all kinds of businesses that have shuttered permanently or sustained dramatic losses. And travel and tourism and hospitality, as I mentioned before, is called out specifically, and very much again is one that I think we've seen losses in our community. That's a sector that we've seen loss. I'm sure that there are more, and it's sort of the idea, thinking about other areas, but the idea also like where where are the resources and partnerships available to us, and thinking about that in terms of how we address impact. Thinking about, for instance, I know YCAP has a lot of rent assistance and homelessness prevention and things, resources already spun up around those kinds of things. And I believe has been getting funding from the state throughout COVID on some of those things. And so it might be an area of partnership to address sector impact or, an individual or family impact. And then, I'm going to say it over and over again. I think I've said it already at least once. The idea of lasting impact and where might we have the most impact in addressing COVID impacts through our investments in order to make them last and really sustain our community for a long time. So next slide. So, I sort of highlighted this before, but, I'm going to dive a little bit quickly, I think, into this and again, opening this up for some discussion around what I've called out here. But, the idea that individuals and families, businesses, nonprofits, and city operations all sustained a level of COVID impact that is eligible for some ARPA response and some funding. The question, of course, is what, where, and how. And I'm sure that there are more areas that we can come up with, but just that's my list for now. Next slide. Just try to quickly run through this. I mean, you've received these ahead of time, I think. And so, I won't necessarily read all of these slides, but or all the bullets on these slides. But in essence, the idea of individuals and families, we've got loss of jobs, loss of income, so reduction in income. Housing disruption as a result, and although obviously there was some stays to those kinds of impacts, at least in a short term, we've got long-term health impacts, whether it's actually from COVID or other delayed procedures and all kinds of other things in our community, whether it's social determinants of health or other potential impacts. You've got a service disruption when it comes to all kinds of things, whether it was school or other things that we count on and have to then, you've got a financial impact or an individual impact. And then lastly, loss of opportunity, and thinking about that in terms of, whether it's advancement or, economic prosperity, the impact to your fortunes, I suppose, when you think about it. In getting through this time, and then what it's going to look like, again, thinking about that as a disparate impact. Next slide. So impacts to businesses. Certainly uncertainty is not the friend of most businesses. It's not something that folks like. We want to be able to plan and fund investments and have the predictability of what's going to happen. Loss of actual business, and I'm not talking loss of like your business closed. I'm saying loss of actual business between businesses and those kinds of things. Loss of customers, those kinds of things. Certainly there were mandated closures or restricted function for businesses for COVID quarantine reasons and all kinds of other things. Employees left businesses, whether it was through need, the business closed or business rolled things back and needed to change its model for a period of time. All the stuff that happened, folks lost jobs, folks left jobs, results in a retraining of staff as you're trying to spin back up. You've got recruitment issues. I think we've seen that in the city, and I've heard anecdotally around the city, around the region, that's a problem. And it will be, I presume, for a while in terms of recovery. The need for COVID supplies in an ongoing way at a cost to the business. And then lastly, just the challenges of accessing the relief. There's been, the CARES Act prior to this, and then now the funding we have to discuss in the ARPA. There's just, it's hard to get through federal processes. Let's be honest. I think we're even dreading that within the city, but not having all the materials to be able to access, whether it's financials or other, things. If you have to prove loss, certainly it requires a level of analysis that many businesses aren't prepared to do. or to run through. So it presents challenges. Next slide, please. So the impacts to nonprofits, these have, you've seen, I think, a split, right, between those who have had a significantly increased caseload and some who have actually seen decreases, depending on what their nonprofit provides. The 501c6s were excluded from stimulus from the CARES Act, and that presented an issue for folks like the Chamber, for Downtown Coalition, and others. So the idea that you're asked to help support the economy and not necessarily provided with resources to keep yourselves whole is a challenge. Certainly they had the same recruitment issues, the closures and disruption, and then the COVID materials. And I'm sure a couple others that I already mentioned. Go ahead.
Sorry, just to clarify, Downtown Coalition is a 501c3. We just made a conscious decision not to apply. We thought the money should go to the businesses, but the Chamber was locked out, as was Travel or Taste Newberg.
Taste Newberg. Yeah, sorry, I used the wrong one then. My bad.
That's okay. I just want people to know we did it on purpose. So.
For the greater good. Maybe that can be another one. Impacts for the greater good. Next slide, please. So the impacts to the city, and this is a pretty short list in the sense of one, the asterisk is because we were able to receive CARES Act funding and use that for some of our staffing needs, our equipment needs, and some of our just general materials and things like that. But also have had an ongoing service interruption, disruption, have had loss of staff, and certainly seen the turnover and recruitment challenges that businesses have seen. And then, certainly remote work comes with a cost and with a challenge. Next slide. All right, so my goal is to stop talking and to hear you all and your ideas, but a little bit more, I guess. Next slide. So the idea, behind this, when I think about, an unexpected $5.3 million plus, that it's once in a lifetime funding, and we need to be intentional about how we invest it. It's that polarities thing of, there's an urgency, and yet, I really truly think that we need to be thoughtful about trying to sustain the impact of these funds for years and years and years. And so, you have the need to address immediate impacts and needs, but you also have to look to the future and think about making a lasting impact. And so that is the challenge. And that's certainly why I think we benefit from a group discussion. And so, looking to fund transformative investments, in my mind, ideally comes from other people. It's not me saying that this is the right thing to do. It's really what I would suggest from a style of investing would be that we propose maybe have essentially a call for folks who we want to address X or Y type of impact or sector or something of that nature. And then we look for ideas from folks who are experienced in those areas, and where we then know we're not supplanting a provider, an expert, and we then really just manage it and make sure that we're investing. I think that has the dual impact of investing in our community, folks who are already doing work, and then speeding along the recovery, because folks will already be doing the work and we're amplifying what they're doing. The idea of endowing Newberg, this is, in my mind, it's like trying to hold on to the money as long as we can. And certainly I think, like I said, we've got about 5 years to spend this, but trying to think about how can we do these, do deals such that we're able to have this money in our community longer than that. And I think that may require a bit of creativity. And then again, I think I mentioned a couple times as well, the idea that there is more to it than just the formula funding. And so, the idea that we put our hand out and try to put forward some good projects, either the city, the region, partnering with nonprofits, whatever it looks like. So really just looking at these concepts, really trying to think about like kind of how we evaluate investments and just trying to think about, just what it might look like from a philosophical. And then, I guess my next slide is really more about like, thinking about how we might review projects. But before I go to that, I just want to know if there's other thoughts or if there's, input around, ways we might think about this money. And again, just trying to get the benefit of your all's experience and knowledge. So I'll pause if there are hands or questions or comments.
It's a lot to absorb, but if you would like to say something, just come off mute and we'll, unfortunately, when the screen's up, I can see 5 at a time, so I'm scanning. Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, just, on general thoughts, thank you first off for the presentation. I think it's great. I think this notion of being transformative is hugely important. I think that community investment, for me, should really be towards things that will last well into the future for the community. Now, that's not necessarily business relief, but I think other projects. The only thing that I would want to steer away from would be any hiring, particularly of staff with one-time money. I mean, it would seem to me that if you're going to do these projects, that they should be, pretty much bricks and mortar, a lot of them. And then if you are going to do any hiring, do it via a consultant rather than adding a staff or staff positions. So that's just one thought. Thanks.
Other hands up. Stephanie.
Yeah, I appreciate all of this, and it is a lot to wrap our heads around. When I'm looking at this, I absolutely agree that we need to look at this as something that we're investing in our community for a long term. Certainly, we would like to go out and buy a Ferrari, but we probably need to put a roof on the house instead. And so really looking at that, and one of the things that, I'd like to use this lens to look at is that the reason we have this money is because we've gone through 18 months of something that was unprecedented. And I don't think, the next time this happens, it'll be precedented. And so thinking about ways that we can bolster the community so that we could get through another time like this would be important for me. So when I'm looking at these things, I'm thinking about things like childcare issues, people having to work from home and school from home and those kinds of things. So making sure that we use sort of the lens around this money needs to reflect sort of where it came from and how we use it to make sure that the next time, hopefully we don't have a next time, but I think we would agree that it certainly could happen, that we have the things in place that we need to make it through 18 months or longer of something like this. And so for me, using that lens to talk about how this money is used in a way that prevents having such huge impact on our community should something like this happen again is really important for me.
Thanks, Stephanie. Other thoughts? Mike.
We can keep moving.
Go, Mike.
Yep.
So did I understand that, Dan, you were saying at the very beginning, there is a time limit of when we have to use the money, or can we set some, like what Stephanie was saying, if we could set some aside for, X amount of years down the road, can we do that?
There's a time limit, 2024, December 31st, 2024, you have to allocate the money, and then 2026, December 31st, 2026, you have to have spent it. I think there may be some creative ways that we might be able to invest it and then look for, a return on that, I guess, right? So if we're making an investment that it's a loan, not a grant, I guess, right? So, thinking about ways that we fund and structure things so we're able to use the money more than once. If somebody's successful in what we do, maybe they're able to give the funding back, to get to their feet, and they're able to give the funding back, and we're able to reinvest it in someone else. That might be a possibility depending on how we want to proceed and the level of complexity that we're willing to take on.
Thanks, Mike. Bryce?
Yeah, appreciate the presentation, the information. I know this isn't necessarily the time to get into what, some of the specifics of what we think. I do have that list when we're ready for it. But until then, I think for the council, being conscious of our goals is something that I would recommend. So go back and look at what do we have. And so whether it's around sustainability, DEI work, customer service, right? Affordable housing, all those. So going back to our goals, I think should be guiding the conversations, A. And then B, I just want to support and affirm what Stephanie had said around thinking about who are the most vulnerable in our communities. Ooh, there was one last thing. I really would love to hear from the community members though, because council, we get time, we can do this, but for others who aren't on council, I would actually prefer to prioritize their voices in this space.
So can't force people to raise their hands. That would be rude.
Well, one of the ideas we had was a survey. And so what we may do in between now and then is survey the budget committee. So those who are digesting and need a little bit more time, we can send out, essentially a request for ideas and information or input. And, that might be a possibility, for those who need a little more time to think about it.
The other thing we talked about, Bryce, and this is where I would love to get the input from those of you who are really networked into the community. If we start talking about, one of the things that is permitted is to spend on public safety and mental health. And so for the people who deal with public safety and mental health, I would love to get their input. Yes. That's exactly my thought, Bryce, is figuring out which community groups are plugged into the broader community, could do something in a water bill, there are ways where we can reach out generally, but also maybe target to specific areas we know we can fund with the money. So if there are specific areas like broadband, going to the school districts and saying, hey, we know who doesn't have access because you ran around in your yellow buses. So maybe there's something we can do there. But what we'd love to do is generate a list of who we should be talking to. Because I'll tell you one thing. I sat in a Yamhill County council meeting. They've been talking about the money they've already received for months, and they haven't done anything. And I don't want us to be them. I would like us to, flip the quarter and make some bets and go, if we can do that, at least in our recommendation to the city. So if you have thoughts, I would love to get people's thoughts. I mean, I always you can go to the chamber, you can go to NDC, you can go to Rotary, you can go to Kiwanis, you can go to the school district, but it's, then I start running out of steam real quick. So the churches, who deals with the people who are really vulnerable and who dipped under the poverty line because of this? I don't know how to reach them, but some people do. So if you have thoughts on who we should be surveying, who are experts in certain areas, that would be great. So any thoughts on that from the council? Or Timothy, not to put you on the spot, or Greg?
I think the chat conversation or question about whether we can do a longer range survey or broader survey, yes, we can.
Yeah, sorry. I think Greg had his hand up. And then Jules, you're next.
It would be really great to look at a pretty comprehensive menu of options, and I don't, Dan knows the needs of the city better than most, and so I'm really sort of refraining from getting creative until I see the baseline there. If we've got $5 million that can be spent over 5 years, approximately $1 million a year is another way to look at it. It's not it's a lot of money, but it's not, it's not a lot of money too. It's easy to spend $1 million a year, as we know. So is there a plan to sort of do that where we can begin to maybe help with the prioritization and things like that? I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of creativity here, and it would be great to have the menu.
List
Yeah,
from
we
the
can-
city.
We can definitely put a menu together. I guess I've pulled staff back, I guess, from doing that yet, because I think it's important that we have an agreement on kind of the criteria and some of those kinds of things. But we definitely can provide a list of some ideas, both creative and more in the box. But, I think, again, this is a good conversation. I'd like to hear from the community service providers who are experts in some of the specific areas, possibly those kinds of things of what might have the most impact. Just being able to ask people who are experts, if you had X amount of money, what would you do, and what kind of difference do you think it would make, and really then be able to invest in that, I think would really be transformative, or could be.
Okay, Jules?
Yeah, I think two of the groups that should definitely be, I think you touched on the survey would be probably the Welcome Center with the Newark School District. I know that the staff there has a long established relationship, especially with the Latinx community. And sometimes they get asked for all sorts of things that aren't within what they're able to provide, especially during COVID. And also thinking about the St. Peter's Church. So I've heard the deacon there say that this year they've had more requests for food boxes and all sorts of needs that they had previously never been requested. So I think they might have some insight and be in touch with those communities. I think that for the city or other folks aren't really in touch with those low-income families. So I think those two would be a really good segue to start with, having those conversations.
Excellent, thank you. And Jules, is it Jules or Jules?
It's Jules.
Okay, because
Yeah,
I'm doing
thank you.
Duolingo to learn Spanish, and the J is tricky, so.
It's Julia in Español, Spanish, Julia.
Okay, thank you. Duolingo, yes. Timothy, anything? Not to put you on the spot. You can say no, not yet.
I've been giving it a lot of thought. There's two big things that stand out to me: infrastructure and housing. We are, a growing town, and infrastructure is always important. This is free money from the government, so using that to build up the infrastructure, either existing projects or new projects that may come up as part of this pandemic. And then obviously housing, that's always on the city council's agenda. But I think Jules had some points about the food boxes and stuff to help the community that's been more directly affected due to not being able to work. That might be a more direct impact, and we don't know how long we're going to be doing this. We don't know how much longer we're going to be fighting this pandemic. Getting a program set up to address those needs might be very beneficial.
Excellent. So maybe I'm hearing, Dan, a balance between kind of long-term impact and kind of helping to remediate short-term impacts.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The individuals and families and the bigger community-wide things. Yeah.
Right. As well as, I just think 2020 was such a strange year with fires and, ice storms and all that sort of thing. And some of the same issues kept happening over and over again for people. And so it might be fruitful to think about put on an emergency response hat. Food safety or security is part of that. Temporary housing, I don't know exactly, but and then as the other thing that I wanted to throw out there is for the first time, they included broadband as infrastructure. Yes, childcare. Thank you, Stephanie. But whatever we do, it has to be sustainable. So you can make a capital investment in something, but the run rate costs we have to figure out how to pay for. So that's kind of a challenge in something that's a service like childcare, or even providing food. You provide it, it's gone. So you have to, whatever we do, we should think about sustainability as well. Let me go down and just some of the council who's hasn't yet. Stephanie, did you want to speak about childcare a little bit?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we really found out during the last 18 months is that something that we already knew is that we are a childcare desert, and that childcare is just something that is super scarce. And when we have people that need to work, and we don't have as many living wage jobs as we used to because of the mill closure and things like that, that we really need to bolster some of that childcare stuff. I know, and this is, I mean, it all impacts each other, but something that we have talked about before are SDCs. And I know that's something that has been prohibitive for particularly childcare places. And so I'd like to see us sort of come up with some creative ways to maybe be able to focus on some of those things. And I think you're right about the sustainability. And I'm sort of thinking more around things that we can do that would get folks in here doing those things that they already know how to do and can do in terms of childcare, but that we can certainly provide something for them in order to be able to have them in our community. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. Sort of being creative with those things, being creative about how we use our resources in Newberg to be able to help childcare facilities come into Newberg and be able to function here, because we know it's something that's necessary, particularly if we're looking at any more amount of time of people having to work at home or needing to go back to work because spouses have not been able to work and those kinds of things.
So I want to, I'm just going down the list of council who haven't weighed in yet. So Denise, any thoughts you want to share? I'll come back to you. Shannon, Bryce was suggesting that you've done a lot of research on this that you could share with us.
Certainly, beginning with Project Oasis and working with Jen Richter at the Early Learning Hub, and then also SUI with Head Start. There are a lot of resources available, and as the conversation has continued to progress around childcare as an infrastructure need, the data, it would be easy to access the data for this community or for this committee to consider.
Okay, would that be like sending us out your thoughts?
I would love to have an opportunity to check with my colleagues before we make it.
Absolutely, but I mean, that's sort of educating us on things. Like we've talked to Dan about the city talking about what infrastructure projects or other projects. Denise found her mute button. Okay, you're up next, Denise. If there's someone else we should talk to, Shannon, that could share the information, that's also fine. But if you could help us maybe understand what investments would make good sense based on your experience, that would be great.
We can start moving forward on that this week.
Awesome.
I think the intent is to really focus in on structure before we go too far down rabbit holes, but we can definitely, I mean, not to put a stop to research sharing, but just try before we go down the throwing money into something. Right. Yeah. Let's make sure we've agreed on all the other pieces. But I think certainly we've agreed in the past that childcare is kind of driving a lot of the issues that we're seeing.
Okay, Denise.
So, Denise, yeah, sorry.
That's okay. I lost my mute button. That was crazy. Disappeared. I agree with all those things. I struggle with the affordable housing, and I've said affordable housing probably, I don't know, 250,000 times maybe. Yeah, it seems like a lot. Maybe Rick's got me beat though. We're never going to build our way to affordable housing. So if we're going to look at that, we're going to have to look at other ideas that aren't buildings, like home share, or investing in helping people think about housing in a different way. Not everyone has to have a house. Some people just want to be safe and comfortable and not drown in debt. Mental health, I think, is a huge issue. And I think as we come out of this, we're going to see more and more as people gather more, we're going to see more of these things come out. Things like coming up with a hybrid program of like Eugene has, or some way of reaching people in an emergency that doesn't exist now, but maybe not doing it alone. Other than that, you know, childcare, I'm a huge proponent of childcare. And again, we're not going to do the childcare, but we have to figure out ways that we can be better partners in our community. And I think that that's really, you know, the city is probably not going to do much of this. It's not our job. It's not what we do, but finding great partners is going to be the best way. I had a homeless woman call me today. The shelter can't get volunteers, and she and her handicapped daughter are, you know, have nowhere to go. So how do we help the shelter raise enough money to have paid staff so they're not dependent on volunteers? Those are the kinds of ways I'd like to think, because I don't believe we should take on more jobs at the city of Newberg. That's all.
Awesome.
Bryce has his hand up.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
Go, Bryce.
all good, all good. Yeah, that's why I was asking. Maybe we could just for a moment stop sharing screens too, so we can see folks' hands that are raised, because I think it's hard for us when it's shared.
Going up and down looking.
Yes, absolutely. And you decided to beat me to it. I'm glad we're in alignment, Denise. At the top of my list was the emergency shelter. And again, I don't know if this is quite the time we're getting into particularities, but 100% that would be something that I'd be interested in thinking about, and taking into account Rick's comments about funding positions and how that can be tricky. And we do want to be sustainable, but that's a huge value, I believe, for the council, and something that the community is needed. And also want to apologize to Shannon. I didn't mean to put Shannon on the spot or create extra work. I was just merely trying to bring up that Shannon had done good research that might be easy to pull. Again, not to get too far into the weeds, but to also just say, like, there have been thoughts around what sustainable funding might look like if we could provide some of the startup. I know the city had already put, I think it was 150 or something, 115 towards a feasibility study. Again, I know SDCs are prohibitive. So I think there are other things that we could do that start to create other options, if that makes sense.
Awesome. Rick?
Sorry. I think, and I think Bryce mentioned this, and I think at least many of the counselors, I mean, we've known this money's been coming for a while now. So I'm sure many of us have been buttoned hold on various projects. So, I mean, I think, maybe at some point, now that you guys have shared the parameters, maybe it's a place to start might be to literally get us to send the list that we've compiled to you, and then see how many of those connect, and sort of walk through that maybe at another session, so that at least we have some tangible things. Otherwise, we could sit here and come up with things, all evening. But I think that might be a way to at least try to hone it in a little bit.
Yeah, my goal wasn't to like expend all the resources in one night. So, having again the criteria, and then I like the idea of sharing lists, but I like also what I tried to say before, if there's a challenge, let's agree on the challenge, and then let's maybe look for suggestions from experts on how to address it. And so, if there are lists, I guess I hope that they're in that type of format of, the homelessness or houselessness and childcare and things like that. And then we think about, avenues that we can take that, and, then we start to kind of drill down into this, because I think that's honestly, thinking about intentional investments, just taking that time to really think through, like, where do we think we're going to see the best return, again, and that it's an investment. It's not just, we've got the money, we've got this immediate problem in front of us, but where are we going to be able to have that long-term impact because we've invested in the community?
Right. So one of the things I'd like to see, and Dan and I talked about this ahead of time, there's so much need out there. this money does have some restrictions on it. So there are 4 places where you can spend it, and likely there's stuff on your list that doesn't fit those 4. It may fit one of those other areas. The county's getting 20 million, right? And they typically do a lot of things that are around human services that the city can supplement. So I'm hoping we also send the list. If they don't fit in the 4, we can look and see, is this a partnership where we can put some money in, McMinnville can put some money in, and the county can, and together we can actually do something. So that it doesn't have to all be funded just by us. The other thing, and I don't know if this is possible or not, so this is going to be something that Dan and Katie do, is to look at our budget and see what areas of spending in our budget that this spending could be put to, so that we could take that budget money and put it in a fund that could become our recycling fund, a fund that we create an emergency fund that goes out in a forgivable loan or a loan that can be repaid and so on. So we could create a fund in Newberg that has fewer time restrictions and use restrictions by using the ARPA fund to do things we were going to do that fit those criteria. So that's the kind of creativity. I don't know what's possible yet, but we talked about, if we can, that might give us more latitude to solve some of these problems that the program isn't geared for, but that we could possibly use it that way. So I don't know, Dan, if any further thoughts on that.
We're happy to look into it, and I love the idea of partnership, and I have had a conversation. I mentioned I borrowed some of the slides from Jeff Towery and McMinnville, and I've talked to him about some of the projects that they're looking to fund, and they're in a similar boat of trying to figure those pieces out. And I believe the commissioners are in the same place that you mentioned, that they've talked about it, but they haven't made decisions. So there probably are some opportunities, and certainly community-wide, there's partners that we can find that are, I'm sure, happy to help us address goals.
Is it possible, Dan, that we could send out a format for people to put their list in? And the only reason is because as you list your project, there's some things we would need to know, like how much and when, because there is a time restriction on this funding. And then which of the 4 allowable buckets this one would fit. And then what possible partners we could enlist to help actually make this happen. One huge thing for me is, and I think Denise brought it up, but the mental health and public safety partnership is something that you've talked about in council. It needs a startup fund to get going. This is possibly something that shows up on the list. It could be something that Providence and Virginia Garcia are also interested in, for example. So we might find partners in the community and nonprofits, in the county, and so on. So understanding where you think partnerships could be would also be great.
Yeah, we can. Our plan was to format a survey, and so it's helpful to hear elements you'd like to have in there that we can bring back. And I think we'll probably try and get one out here before the end of the week to the budget committee. And then I've got a few more slides if we want to run through those. And some of that is public engagement or community engagement. And so we want to be able to do engagement to the broader community as well. But for now, at least, just trying to kind of make sure that we have talked about, like, with the knowledge that you all have of our budget and municipal operations, just trying to think through like kind of this criteria matrix concept of this is the filter that we want to move forward with.
One last comment, and I promise I'll go on mute. When you do a program like this, administering the program is not free.
Yep.
So you either have to cut something else that your personnel are working on, or you're going to need to enlist someone. I'll say enlist in view of Rick's comment about not adding to staffing, whether you do it with a program manager that you contract with or whatever. But a conscious decision on how we administer this would be very important in getting it done.
Yep, you're stealing my thunder.
If I could just follow up on that, I think this is where, I mean, in my mind, I think Denise said the same thing. You know, I don't see the city of Newberg getting in the childcare business, right? I don't see any of that. So it would seem to me that we need to partner as much as possible, knowing that we do not want to create an administrative nightmare. So as many as we can get other people to do the work, I would certainly recommend that. And if it's nonprofits, other businesses, other entities, I would certainly get them involved. And so the administration from the city's point is really tracking what it is that these others are doing.
You're still muted, Molly. Sorry.
I promise to mute. The other thing, Rick, is whenever you get money, as you know, there's also as a nonprofit, city has the same problem. You have to not only track, but you have to report back. So it is a non-zero workload to give away $5 million. That was my only point.
Yep.
I see you had your hand up.
Yes, yeah. I was thinking back to the question around who we could communicate with and how, and a couple things came to mind. One was around process. I think the process that we went through for hiring the police chief, I liked a lot of aspects of it, right? So in that there was the broader surveying of the community, but then there's intentional reaching out to folks in the community, and then you have, you know, obviously counselor perspectives taken into account. So in this case, it's good that all of us are providing our thoughts to a survey. Again, I still would advocate for putting something out on our social media or on the website to just let people know, like, what ideas do you have? It doesn't hurt to ask, while we're also intentionally soliciting feedback from community organizations. With that, two that come to mind. One is George Fox. It's a big, obviously, institution in the city. They might already have some programs or ideas of what might help. And then the other one is, and I don't know if we can do this, I'd have to go back and look at those 4 things again. But obviously the hospital, we know hospitals are really taxed. And so I don't know to what degree we might be able to use some of these funds to provide immediate relief to Providence that could help quite literally save lives potentially. So that'd be something that would be more timely and someone to reach out to.
Just keep in mind that there are other funds for Providence as well, right? You know, that the hospitals and hospital systems would be able to access. So it's not, they're not reliant on us necessarily. I mean, I understand the spirit of partnership and, you know, the impact and all that, but I think there are other sources too.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I'm taking that into consideration when I think about all of it, because again, parents have gotten funds for their children theoretically, but we should still consider childcare. Businesses have had access to funds, but we should still consider businesses. But yeah,
absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
So can I?
Your slides?
Yeah, I was gonna say, can I jump through? So the next slide, Sue, this one is really kind of about the way we might think about reviewing funding once we get to that point. You know, so thinking about the investments we would make and how we want to evaluate them. So one-time funds, you know, really thinking about, in my mind, one-time projects, you know, so funding things that are not going to require or not going to set us up for a cliff at some point, or a fiscal cliff. You know, thinking about, you know, programs require staff, I mean, and documentation. I mean, that's something that was just discussed. I mean, that's absolutely an expectation from the feds. If we, or as we accept this money, we're going to need to have an ongoing cadence of reporting, and that the more complicated we make this, the more money we give to, the smaller amounts of money that we give to lots of different people, which I'm not opposed to, requires, I think, a dedicated staff member, arguably, because you're going to need to have regular oversight of those folks. And so we still haven't got the slide advanced to, you know, so you're going to have the just the ongoing documentation and paper trail related to that, you know, both at the federal level, but I think the community is going to expect it as well. Thank you. You know, I think we need to, as was said, you know, so appreciate the underscore there, that make the community more resilient. So, you know, let's learn from this. Let's, you know, think about ways we can actually address the lessons that we've been exposed to by going through this period. let's think about equity. You know, mentioned the disparate impacts, and also, you know, that being a goal, and, you know, just trying to think about how we serve those who've been underserved in our community, and, you know, what resources may help make a difference there. You know, thinking about the you know, efficiencies and improvements that we have learned, I think, and I was thinking honestly about this from the city's operations, but I'm sure that we can think about this community wide and broadly. You know, the idea of, you know, I think a lot of us thought we would never be able to remote work at the scale what we're doing, and we are quite capable as we do it right now. So just the idea of some of those efficiencies and you know, the opportunities that we've seen been forced into and seen be effective. You know, an ongoing thread is, you know, do we need to have individuals who work for companies have to live in the town and come to work every day like they've done for generations? And so there's those kinds of things, like thinking about what different ways of doing the same thing, if you will, or addressing the problems that we're seeing. Leverage partner, you know, looking for ways to extend projects and such that the city's not expected to pay the whole freight. And I really think the extent that we can, I don't want to make grants. I'd like to make loans that are maybe forgivable loans or things of that nature, so that there are strings attached to this, so that we don't necessarily wish and hope that something happens, but we have a way of clawing back money if it doesn't, and or, you know, some measurable outcomes of, you know, we expect this in making this investment. And that sort of ties back to the idea that it requires staff to run these kinds of things. But just looking at some of the ways we might review again, I guess I'm envisioning this as sort of a request for proposals kind of concept. You know, if we're thinking childcare or, you know, emergency operations or, you know, mental health are important, you know, we're essentially saying, like, how would you help us address these problems in our community, and then evaluating those proposals based on criteria. So, you know, just looking at ways we might review, that's kind of the intent here. So we've trod through some of this already, but I don't know if we want to have a discussion on this one too. Totally open to it. But we can also come back if that's preferable. I can finish and then we can come back to this one, or this concept.
Let's get through your slides, and then I'm sure people won't be shy.
Okay. So the next slide then, you know, really, again, community engagement and input is going to be critical. You know, we need to seek public input. We've got to, you know, these sort of bedrock principle kinds of things, but seek public input, that we need to share decision-making criteria. Again, that's why I think it's important that we have some criteria so we can share it, whether it's for solicitation purposes, you know, whether it's for validation purposes, or whether it's just for, this is why we chose what we did. I'm sure there'll be questions as we go. You know, there'll be some project that got funded and one that didn't. So we'll also need to solicit ideas from the various affected sectors, record each allocation, and be transparent on our website and in our budget. So, I mean, those are sort of things we've already kind of touched on, but I think our expectations of ARPA and from the feds expectations that we should have, you know, in allocating the money. So we kind of talked a little bit about those two questions at the bottom, but again, we can come back to those. Next slide, please. Almost there on my slides. I've got one more after this. So, you know, immediate actions requested. You know, really, I see the need for project support staff, and I see it as a temporary staff. You know, kind of a term staff, and so that, you know, through the life of this funding, that we would have an allocation for, you know, overhead essentially that would help us manage the ongoing allocations, and that would give us the bandwidth to do that and to make allocations. I actually have thought more about the grant support, and I think that the grant support likely needs to come out of our budget. And, you know, at the same level, this is sort of the way that you pull in more funding. And I look at it a little bit the way that Dave Hageberg talked about the bypass funding, and, you know, the idea we spent, I think it was 150,000 on lobbying, and we secured 32 million or whatever the math was. You know, if you're successful, it's well worth the investment. And, you know, I think, again, if we want more than what was just formula allocated to the city, this is probably something we're going to have to do, because I really don't know that we have neither the time nor the expertise to really get out there and look for folks. or look for funding from our staff. Essentially the public engagement really should start now as well. And the question there is really like, survey, and we've kind of already started to get into that detail, but then, the idea of engaging the sectors and talking about these conversations with the various players too. And I think that those are immediate actions, and, with the thumbs up to start talking about some of those funding areas. I think that might wait until after we've had our meeting on the 15th, but certainly wouldn't wait much beyond that to start that kind of an engagement. And if there are other suggestions for immediate actions, open to that. And then my last slide here is just timing. Again, reminder that there is a deadline, and it's a pretty generous one in the sense of how long we have to expend the funding. We're looking right now for determining principles and goals and starting public outreach now. And then, continuing that on that engagement and transparency beyond, and looking at a time frame. In my mind, what I'd like to get out of the next meeting is a sense of, when we might be ready or how we might want to move forward those solicitations and start to be able to fund some things. I'd also think about, like, and again, I'm a bit of a matrix person, so I sort of see this as like an intertwined kind of web, but thinking about the idea of solicitations, it's like, in my mind, you've got the column A of, healthcare or whatever the topic is, and then thinking about ways, whether it's short-term, long-term, medium-term, whether it's all of the above, and thinking about ways we might put together various projects and then be able to review those, consider which ones are the best matches and which ones we'd like to move forward with. I think that we probably need to have some discussion about that, but we'll obviously need some time to spin those ideas up if we're looking at it in the sense that we're looking for essentially the best ideas of our community, agencies, members, et cetera, businesses, and then trying to decide, yep, we believe in that one, go. It's almost venture capitalism in a way. We've been watching a little bit too much Shark Tank in my house, but just thinking about those kinds of things. Like, I've got this great idea to solve this problem, and we ask a bunch of questions and figure it out. So that's sort of how I'm envisioning this moving forward. And I will stop talking, and that is my last slide.
So if we could kind of poll everyone on their thoughts on public outreach, that would be great. We've had some input on that, but other thoughts after Dan's slides on this late Tuesday evening? No one went to Tunes on Tuesday. Someone looking for their hand thing and can't find it? No. Let me throw out an idea and you guys poo-poo it or make it into something good. If this group put forth their top 5 areas, would we then recruit the people in the community that are knowledgeable? Like childcare is a good example. Recruit the people who have been through the mill on it and know what's needed. Get them into a room, do this presentation for them, and then say, give us your thoughts. Go away for a week, come back, give us your project list. Do the same thing for education infrastructure. What are the other things that you talked about? Emergency shelter, mental health, and public safety. Do you want to pick some areas? Because then we could go recruit the experts in those areas to advise us as part of our decision making. Just a thought I had. They're all asleep, Dan.
I mean, I would go back to the list idea, because I think, if we have lists of areas, we have lists of specific projects, we can then go to the people that do them. That's the way I would think it would be the easiest. Like you say, if it's childcare or if it's, whatever other area it is. And that's what I would think. But I think, probably start with a poll. I'm not sure at this moment with the public outreach, what the objective of the public outreach is at this early stage, because I don't know that we've identified categories particularly to even ask people about, maybe, but I don't know, maybe I'm misunderstanding.
I think there was a question as to whether we wanted to include others in the community besides the folks on this call or in the budget committee in building the categories. I think that was where I was thinking to go.
Yeah, Rick, that the COVID meeting that used to be weekly, where you had industry leaders, you had education, you had Providence, you had
Yeah,
Virginia.
we're still meeting. We're still meeting. Yeah.
I'd ask that group for their input on the list. And in order to do that, you sort of need to inform them about, you know, what this animal is, so that they understand what we can do and what we can't do with the money. But
Well, yeah.
they're a good list generator, let me put it that way. And they're not in this committee. So it would seem like a good idea to chat with them, and there's probably others. Bryce,
Yeah,
you
I
were
get
asking,
that.
oh, go ahead, Rick.
Sorry, I mean, I get that. But if we don't have a list, or we don't have the categories to even ask them about, it's going to be, hey, we got $5 million. What do you want to do with it? I think we probably have to go with categories initially, or at least in my opinion, or it would be hard for me to approach that group without some parameters. Otherwise, it'd be all over the board, I would think.
Yes. Bryce, Greg, go ahead.
Bryce was ahead.
Oh, he does have his hand up. You know what? Your hand merges into the picture on the wall behind you.
Oh,
Go ahead, Bryce.
interesting.
Sorry.
I'll have to move this picture. That's good to know. That's good to know. Or I can change the color tone potentially.
Just move there you go.
Better? Okay. Great. No, it's good to know. Thank you. I would actually be a fan of starting earlier rather than us generating a list, then figuring out who the industry experts are, to open it up to the people at the front end, because there could be like really dope ideas that are just outside of our purview because of our limited lived experiences. And I wouldn't want to miss really good opportunities to potentially fund things because we didn't solicit the broader Newberg community.
Would you be up for sitting down with me and or Dan? I'm volunteering, Dan, to try and write that survey, because I think Rick's point is good. When you just ask someone, if you had $5 million, how would you spend it, without explaining the limitations on what you can do, which that's going to be tricky. So I'm game for sitting down with you and trying to write that survey if you'd like to.
Yeah, I'd be willing to help. And I also think, Dan did this presentation, to me, makes sense, and I think would make sense to a number of folks. So I think we could, in a survey, outline the parameters of how the money can be spent, outline the problem that we're trying to address, and then open it up. And then we can use our wisdom on the back end to be like, that doesn't really count. And we can, provide a filtering, but I think initially opening it up. A couple last things. There were questions about, like communication. I think disclosing survey results would be important, Dan. So if we are going to survey, being transparent about what did folks say, so we can show where there's alignment or maybe where there isn't alignment. And then the last that I had in terms of folks to contact would be businesses. So I'm particularly concerned about businesses that have had to close in Newberg, trying to figure out what help they might need to potentially reopen, if that's even possible. And then those who are like just holding on. My worry would be that as we're, going through this very good intentional community engagement process, that there's businesses that are going to lose, out because of our own timelines if we don't know where they're at.
Right. Greg.
I understand completely, the idea of wanting to just do a massive brainstorm and get some great ideas that are outside the box that are not on anybody's radar. But I would advise against that heavily, just for a lot of the reasons that Rick was talking about. I think you go and you begin to set expectations with individuals and groups that are not, that are going to have to be dashed. And so I think, looking at a creative way to come to the community with an edited, informed list of opportunities and options that then the community can select from, to me seems like a far more manageable process. There is a lot of details, capital versus staffing versus sustainability issues versus community need, city need. There are a lot of factors to weigh, and you know, we've got the city here, we've got a group, we've got a committee, we've got both the city council. I would love to invite the community to come in and somehow make suggestions about things, but I'm very concerned that it actually creates problems, not only for the city, but just, you know, people feeling like, well, they didn't take my idea, you know, so, you know, I wasn't heard, and my needs weren't listened to, and things like that. Whereas if we already have a pre-vetted list that we're all, you know, in agreement would be fundable, appropriate to the intent of the funds, and we have that list decided upon first, before really sort of, you know, opening it up to huge amounts of public input. It's just not that much money. I'm just going to keep saying that it is not that much.
It'll go fast.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Greg. There is a way to put the survey out and have a section called other things we haven't thought of that allows the community to then weigh in. So sometimes we do that on surveys to capture what we missed. Okay, other thoughts on, so I'm going to summarize a little bit and see if we got it kind of right. So we've come up with a list of areas, and I won't try them, list them, but they jive quite nicely with council priorities and things that we've all experienced. So no surprises on the list. And the idea would be then to try and get some projects under these headers from groups that are knowledgeable or from the community, so that when we get together in September, which is only 2 weeks away, our next meeting, we can start looking at some projects, and we would ask that we get some immediate need projects as well as longer term infrastructure projects to look at. So one of the things Dan was talking about was creating a matrix or a table, so when people put something on the list, they kind of helped us put it in the right bucket for, you know, when will the money be spent by, and which of these areas does it address, and that kind of thing. So that's
just to be clear, I'm not suggesting that September 15th will have a list of projects. I think that's
not comprehensive,
too quick.
but the city has some, right?
Yep. No, I think we do. I think that my concern is that then, you know, you easily spend it 10 times, 20 times over without having heard from the community, you know, and I worry a little bit about, you know, that focus on, okay, well, that seems like a good one, and we've talked about X, Y, and you even mentioned, you know, the idea that we've had some budget items that have been cut, or those kinds of things that we've talked about in the past that would be eligible. I just don't want to zero in on things too early either, you know, in that sense. But you know, I respect the idea that, you know, engagement needs to be authentic, and if we're not really asking people for their ideas, you know, then it's a problem, I guess. And, you know, I worry that we would go down the path and people would say, well, you've already got this list. And so, you know, so anyway, my thought was more just put the criteria together and get us to the place where we can solicit those better ideas. And that'll take us some time just to get to those meetings, get to those groups, and actually, you know, have that conversation. That was my thought.
Bryce?
Oh, gosh, this unmute button is so hard to click. Yes, Greg, definitely have deep appreciation for your wisdom, and I agree with you. I think there is absolutely a risk that if we open it up too wide and people don't get what they want, then they get real angry. And then nowadays, it seems like everyone's getting angry for some reason. I fully affirm that. I still do feel pretty strongly that soliciting to the broader community could hold value, but I would love to hear from other folks on the committee or the city council to get what their thoughts are, and then maybe we can collectively, I don't know if we need to vote or just, you know, try to get a sense of the meeting, if you will, and move forward in a direction. But yeah, I would love to hear others' thoughts on what it looked like to move forward.
Denise?
I agree with Bryce, of course, because I do community-led action. I think we could not make promises and still say, what are some ideas of that, you know, without even mentioning the money, right? What are some ideas that people have about what's missing in their lives, you know, like a happy, like this, what would make your life better kind of. Bryce is out of focus. It's it's very strange. I've never seen that happen. It's been a weird Zoom night. So I think there's ways to do it. That's not promising anyone anything, but you know, give us your big idea.
Okay, thanks, Denise. Rick?
I was just going to say, not to be cynical, but maybe I am, is that remember this budget committee in this last round, by my recollection, we got exactly 0 public comment, and that was on the entire budget. So how interested people, I mean, maybe if we're talking about spending money that people might, you know, see come their way, that might be something, but I just want to say the experience has been not great when it comes to input on budgetary matters.
So what if kind of I'm jamming off of, and if you raise your hand, please, and I'll shut up and you guys go first. Going off Denise's idea and Bryce's idea, and not saying what would you spend money on, but a more general community survey that says, these are common areas. How were you impacted in these areas? What would have made it better? So you're not promising to do anything. You're not mentioning money. You're really in outreach mode. Tell me how you were impacted. And I'm afraid you're right, Rick, that really most people want to go to work, go home, make dinner, raise their kids, and live their life. And going to budget meeting isn't on the top of their list. I don't know why, but trying is not a bad thing, right? Trying to reach out is not a bad thing. Mike, any thoughts since you're on the upper left of my screen?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of agree with Rick. I think we need to be careful as we're putting, if we're going to put some type of a survey out, we have to have the parameters of what this money can be used for, really have it be specific so that people just don't go, well, you know, I'd like this or that, and it's nothing that we can even use, right. Which kind of also leads to Greg's point, which, so I think that we really need to make it specific. And what are the things that you would like to see happen with this money in these specific areas, and see what people say and go from there. I mean, I've already got some ideas of what I'd like to see some of that money used for, but let's make it really specific and try not to make it a really big survey. That'd be my point of view on it.
Yeah. We haven't heard from Stephanie in a while, so I'm going to pick on her. Any thoughts, Stephanie?
Yeah, I tend to sway towards as much public input as possible, but I do agree with making sure that we're also communicating that this isn't just like, do you want ponies? It's these are the buckets that we're talking about, and inside of those buckets, are there anything that would have made the last 18 months you know, a time that you would have survived better? Or are there things that you feel like the city needs in the long term to be successful for all residents? So I'm sort of in that, like, walking in both sections, but I do think public input is really important. And I know that people don't show up, which I think is a reminder to us that we go to them instead of asking them to show up here. And so I think we've seen that while we don't get everyone responding to a survey, we certainly get more people responding to a survey than at public testimony. So I'd like to take it to people in that regard.
Okay, Timothy, we haven't heard from you in a while, so it's okay to say nothing new to say.
From what I've heard, I would agree. I mean, getting the public comments, and I'm just thinking from the perspective of, we don't want to give them too much leeway, because then they'll just come up with a massive long list that we won't be able to meet anyway. But going in with, here's a list of buckets, and I think Stephanie was kind of alluding to that, you know, telling them that these are the buckets that we can work within, got $5 million to spend. Let's figure out something that a majority of the city can agree on to move forward.
Okay. And the criteria that Dan went through before, that's another thing. And you've all got the PDF. It's at the very end of the presentations, at the very end of the minutes and things. One of the other things that's useful in prioritizing is understanding there's different kinds of buckets even within an area like childcare. So we also need to give some thought to immediate aid versus infrastructure for longer term impact.
I just have one more comment about public input. I would much rather, when asked why you didn't ask, to say, well, we did, but you didn't come, than to say, we didn't think you'd come. Yeah. Or we didn't think you would. It looks, and I don't want to underestimate people or their interest ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true. I agree. The only other thought would be, again, sort of the hybrid of this is that at some point, if we have a list of projects in various buckets, we could also ask the public to simply rank them. Say, hey, which of these 80 projects in each category most tickle your fancy? And then that way there is the input with the option of, or suggest something else kind of thing. I mean, that may be another way to skin this proverbial cat.
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength.
I like that a lot.
Okay.
Kind of a hybrid.
Mm-hmm.
When just listening to the conversation, one of the other questions that comes up is thinking about like the scale or the size of the investment we're looking to make in some of these sectors too, just thinking about asking that question maybe, or even thinking about how that is a parameter of, if you've got what is, arguably not a lot of money in that sense of 5 million, over 5 years, how much would you like to put into some of these buckets, I guess, how important is this when you think about ranking, is mental health the most important, or is childcare, and then maybe that helps us to think about, the size of investment we want to make.
Yeah. There was one other thing. We used to do work with Project Access Now, and one of the things that they did was they encouraged people submitting projects to actually group together with, so if it's nonprofits, as it often was, multiple nonprofits working together on a single proposal, which meant that you were leveraging all the resources of the community to get something done. So we might give extra points for people who partner, that kind of thing.
It's a common Fed trick, right? Get a regional impact. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Greg's
got another point there. Just kind of tagging on to what Dan just said about having people on a survey rank their level of importance, or have we distributed buckets well enough. I would be very cautious about the inaccuracy of the results from a voluntary survey. If we're going to come in with a real polling outfit that's going to do randomized calls and select the appropriate number of people in order to ensure that we are actually getting the input of the public, then I'm all for it. But voluntary surveys are meaningless in terms of, they're great, I think, for capturing brainstorming and ideas from various interested parties, but not for surveying the relative importance amongst the population.
Denise?
And then the only problem with that route is you often lose people in poverty or without access because they tend to change their emails and phone numbers more. So you'd have to have somebody do a lot of in-person, in place. You miss a large population that way too. So there's so many things to always consider. And I don't think we need scientific results, really. I think we just need, some good ideas, a good indication. That's the word. A good indication of where people are heading.
Yeah, and we have a lot of experience too, guys, because we've just been responding to these issues for the last 18 months. So we don't have to make this stuff up. Go ahead, Julia.
Thank you, Molly. So that was a little bit more of actually my concern, what Denise just brought up. I definitely go obviously for the community input, but more of being intentional on how we're getting or doing the surveys. I think for some groups, it's great to put it on the website, but for other communities, it's not. Also thinking of the folks at the shelter, like maybe having some paper format surveys, or for folks in other communities who do need that direct outreach, whether it's through the church or through the school. I think just being very intentional and having like paper forms for some folks is going to be what's needed. So that was more of my concern there.
Thank you. Dan, is it possible to partner with Newberg School District? I mean, if anyone knows about childcare problems, it's likely to be people with kids in school. So that's a community they talk to all the time.
Partner on outreach or partner on solutions? I'm not sure I understood.
Well, I was thinking just on outreach, my kids used to bring home stuff all the time. I don't know if they still do that. My kids are in their 30s, so.
They probably do bring home stuff, but maybe not from school. I think the Welcome Center is a great option that Jules had mentioned before, that really has been so demonstrable as the place that people go for that kind of information, of all backgrounds in our community. So that would be probably a good place, but certainly we could reach out to the school district and find out if there are other ways to do that.
If the Welcome Center is the right way, that's great.
Yeah, the other thing that I'll add is that if you want to know what families are struggling, go to the teachers, because they know better than anyone. And that's always been with Habitat. That's always been our best source of family applicants is the schools and the teachers.
Yeah. So as we get these categories, so when we go into our next meeting on the 15th, kind of what is your thought, Dan, for what you want to get done 2 weeks from now? Because we're not going to jump into doing a budget list.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can provide city projects, and we've got some interesting both budget ideas and unbudgeted, creative ideas that we can come up with between now and then. But really, I'd like to kind of zero in on those categories and criteria, because I think that'll be how we best do outreach. Because if we're going to spin up, whether it's creative or quote unquote boring projects, right? If we're going to address the issues, we're going to need both of those things. We're going to need to know that we already know, at least as well as they've been defined for now, the ARPA parameters and, kind of timing and reporting and some of those things. I think we can pull those things together and inform the community. But the reality is, I think, we decide on the buckets and we decide on how we'd like to evaluate those projects in order to then maybe it's, RFI, RFP, whatever you want to call it. And then that next quarter, we would probably be able to have that list and, provide a more detailed opportunity for discussion around projects possibly, and just thinking that through just timing wise, it'll take us some time to do outreach and to really get input from folks.
So would it be possible, I'm trying to understand what this team should do over the next 2 weeks before September 15th. So as an example, I would happily meet with Bryce and talk with Lacey about what's possible in an online survey, and bring that back to this group as, hey, we've talked about keeping it into a category and, see if we can find that golden mean so that you have input on the survey from this group when we get together. Is that the kind of thing you're thinking about? I'm not quite sure what your expectation for the 15th is.
I think what I had thought through would be surveying this group and then kind of coming back with some of a little bit more structure. And then we could go forward in those next steps maybe, but I'm open to the idea that part of that structure, maybe soliciting ideas from the broader community as part of getting clarity. But again, I just don't think we're going to have time to do anything in 2 weeks effectively in that sense, doing outreach. And so it would be more setting things up and kind of getting the structure of how we intend to move forward with ARPA, so that, if I'm or whomever in the city is going out and talking to folks, that we have that clarity. So, if there are ideas, if there are lists that folks want to send, if we can survey, or, those kinds of things. I mean, I'm open to, whether it's myself, Katie, if folks want to send stuff directly to us, we can start to cobble, and, we'll have a department head discussion or two between now and then about our own internal ideas to put that together. But I don't want to dive into the weeds yet. I really want to be intentional about the structure and criteria and those things. So, between now and then, I'd love to hear from all of you, and then we can bring it back and maybe we zero in the meeting on that structure.
Okay. Sounds good. Other thoughts, folks? Gone.
I just want to thank everybody for this. This has actually honestly been one of the more interesting discussions to be part of in my year and a half in Newberg. And I think it's that excitement of, there's a lot of, ideas and energy behind, we can make a real impact to our community. And I think, just take it on a positive note, I guess, right, that there's a lot of opportunity out there maybe to make impacts. We've seen a lot of COVID, a long time of COVID, and that, I'm energized by the conversation between, the council and community members and that sort of thing. And it's exciting to think that we'll actually be able to invest in Newberg.
Yeah, it's nice. All right. Well, then we'll close this meeting and talk again on the 15th.
Okay.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you all.